Chairman, panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Let me start with a bit of a disclaimer. Despite what is implied in the program, I hardly represent India Inc., but I will speak from the perspective of, much more from the perspective of the business side of things and touch on a few other things with the permission of the chair. I'll make sure I make these points very briefly, so I'm not going to build up an argument. I love flaws, but I don't want to build a collection of flaws here. And, I think starting with Ambassador Surendra Kumar's traffic lights, which of course in Delhi are not taken seriously, they're treated like decorations on the street. I'll take it a little more seriously. But starting with that, I think the relationship is on amber, the Indo-US relationship, and has been so for the last 2 or 3 years. It's not red, it's not stopped, it's moving on, possibly. It's not green, it's not going as vigorously as it was some time ago. I think it's on amber. And one of the reasons, it seems to me, and I know I make a very controversial statement here, is that the underlying assumption saying that this relationship is built on things like shared democratic values is, to use a very harsh but now popularized term, nonsense. Democratic values don't mean anything because both sides, us maybe a little less than the other side, are very happy doing business with all kinds of regimes. And I think that's well known. I don't want to dilate on that. So the fact that we are both democracies means very, very little. It may seem to imply a lot. It doesn't in terms of big relationship. What matters is that the people-to-people relationship, culturally, there's a great deal of affinity and comfort on both sides. And that has driven business relationships like nothing else has. Which is why when Indians go there and work, either in universities or in companies or set up their own businesses, which has happened a great deal right now, the kind of reaction from most Americans is really one of, again to use a hackneyed term, it's really awe. Because they say, hey, these guys work hard, they have the right values, they're very bright, they're very brainy, and they're good guys. And I think this perception is really important because business is built on trust. Business requires two things, trust and certainty. When you're working with a partner, even a partner who's 10,000 or more kilometers away, then what you need is to know certainty that I've given you this, I will get it back, and you need trust with your partner or your vendor. Don't call him a partner, call him a vendor. And that comes from this shared comfort culturally and the shared comfort of saying these are good guys. And I think that's important, not the democracy part according to me. And how has that given rise to business things? We can see how the business has grown phenomenally as complementarity has increased. And one reason I said we are somewhat on amber now is that the next stage of growth of Indo-US trade, which is now $100 billion, while it will continue to grow, if we are to look at the next big leap forward, is going to depend a very great deal on factors which now are getting into what you might broadly call the geostrategic area. Our needs are increasingly in the area where we're trying to diversify from our other traditional suppliers, which are mainly in defense, high technology, hardware. Our needs are increasingly going to be in areas, if we so choose, and I think we have chosen so already, in nuclear areas, not just getting a ready-made, reactor of a somewhat doubtful technology at a huge price, but the basic technologies. And those technologies, are they going to come to us or no, is going to be determined by broader geostrategic considerations. In reverse, on the US side, and Subir mentioned this, what they need and what we can export are things like generic pharmaceuticals. What we can get there is IT to cut costs and increase their efficiency. And there you have a different kind of possible barrier. And that's coming a great deal, and this is a very interesting transformation, and I want to step a minute and tangentially mention this, that earlier years, the two businesses cooperated, particularly in the last decade. There was tremendous cooperation on the business-to-business side, and I've seen this, and many of you have seen this on the IT side, where the US customer loved to work with India because he got great service, great quality at a low cost. And so the business-to-business relationship was very strong. Every time we have had in the past visa problems with the US in terms of Indian IT professionals going there, the US companies stood up for us, either directly or indirectly, and fought for us, in many ways being our front persons there. We didn't have to be there ourselves. That is interestingly going through some change now. The most visible form of that change is in the pharmaceutical area, where the opposition is not from the US, whereas again, as Subir mentioned, they would probably welcome generics at a lower price to put into place a healthcare system that's a lower cost. The resistance is coming from US pharmaceutical companies. I think, and I foresee, though we aren't seeing it yet, we will begin to see a somewhat similar resistance on IT or other big export. In fact, it's our number one export to the US today. And yes, Subir, it is go or gum, but the number one export in terms of total export is IT by a huge amount. We're going to see, as we get more and more technologically sophisticated, direct competition with US based multinationals. We're already seeing signs of that. It's not on a large scale. They've chosen to do in reverse what Indian companies did earlier, which is to globalize. They've got huge numbers of people here. If you look at IBM, they've got 150,000 people working here now. So you begin to see that kind of thing happening, and as the Indian IT companies get higher up the value chain, the resistance is going to come from the US IT companies. One indication of that is a very controversial issue right now for the Indian IT industry, and makes even sometimes the mainland press here, is the visa issue. And this time, if I mention it here in a somewhat nuanced manner, I'd be very careful about what I say on this, but there is a degree of not partnership with US companies which we had in the past to get visas. In fact, I would go so far as to say some of them are implicitly egging on those who want to put bars here because it reduces competition for them. So we're beginning to see this change in relationship, where the business to business relationship, which together worked to see how to increase trade, is smelling competitive favors. And I think therefore the next stage of this is going to depend on where the geostrategic relationship takes us and where that is going to go. Just a couple of other points from a slightly different perspective, and more specifically to the Obama-Manmohan Singh meeting, and that was one of the things here. To me, interestingly, what happened before the meeting was more important. There was a lot of pressure from the business side on the Indian government to correct some of the things which were inhibiting American business here. One of them was, of course, the preferred market access for equipment. And I won't dilate on that, but there was an issue of security and therefore preferred market access for local production. The second one was tax issues, which bedeviled a number of American companies operating here. And in both cases, prior to the visit, these were eased up, clearly driven by the fact that our Prime Minister was going there. So I think that was an important part. The other part was right there when the Prime Minister met CEOs of US companies, and they gave vent to some of their concerns and difficulties that they were having. Generally a positive meeting. But the feedback from that is that, this sounded good, but things are on hold till the elections, till the Indian elections. And I think that's another factor in the relationship in the short and medium term. What happens in the election in the next 1 year, you're not going to see too much activity in terms of large investments in new areas from US companies. So that's going to somewhat stymie the business momentum of what we've seen. The third is, of course, the big business things. Defense cooperation on the commercial side. And Professor Vijayalakshmi mentioned this directly and somewhat obliquely. That's going to be the big driver in future. And that's going to depend on how much technology the US is willing to share with us. Finally, on the nuclear side, very same thing. Yes, some plants which come as turnkey plants, the Westinghouse plant maybe, but looking ahead, if we are to continue down this path, what we're going to need is not plants but specific technologies. And are they willing to part with those? So this is where I begin to see the future, where the impingement of strategic considerations on both sides are going to affect policies which will in turn affect business. If those work positively, you're going to see a huge boost in business relationship. If they don't quite work out where they are, I fear you're going to see more unease, more competition, more difficulty, and a somewhat plateauing of the business relationship. And that in turn will, in reverse feedback, affect the broader geostrategic aspects of the Indo-US relationship. Let me stop there. Thank you.